Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Greg Weinstein. I use he, him pronouns. I am the inclusive research lead at CVS Health on the inclusive design team there. I'm joining you all from Pittsburgh today, where it is characteristically cold and gray. Yeah, so I was really happy to be here. Um, Before I start, just a couple quick notes about the platform accessibility in case anybody needs and hasn't found these features yet. You have closed captions available to you with a button below the presentation. And if you want to put the presentation into full screen to cut down on distractions in the browser or whatever, you can also do that with the button below the presentation. I can't share the presentation with you, but I will, of course, describe what is on the screen as we're going along. And as Dave said, if you put, I'm not going to be able to monitor the chat in real time, but if you put questions in, I will be very happy to answer questions at the end as time permits. I think there should be some time at the end. So, as the inclusive research lead at CVS, the work that I do is primarily building up our program in conducting UX research with participants with disabilities. I'm going to talk a bit about what inclusive research is in this presentation. It's not only research with disabled participants, but that's what I focus on in my work. Then I will talk a bit about how we in inclusive research collaborate with CVS's design system team. And then I'll talk you through a case study about horizontal scrolls at the end. Before I get into this, I want to thank a few people. I want to thank Joe and everybody who's working on this conference because it's amazing and I'm really delighted to be here, and the work that they put into making it happen is really impressive. Of course, want to thank my inclusive research and design colleagues because they're a delight to work with and I learn a ton from them every day, and want to specifically give a shout out to Erica McCoy, who I work closely with on inclusive research and had a major role in developing the material that I'm going to be presenting today. So, starting out with the claim, the principle, the assertion that all user research should be inclusive. And we'll start with some very some cold statistics. Let's get these out of the way first. These are the things that we often have to cite when we need to make a business case for accessibility, for why we need to do work that takes into account the needs of people with disabilities. A CDC statistic, 26% of adults in the US live with a disability, 1 in 4 people, and that's estimated to be in the neighborhood of 1 billion people globally. A lot of people. And $645 billion in disposable income is controlled by people with disabilities in the United States. And these statistics are things that I always sort of keep in my back pocket because if people can come up with no other reason for designing and creating products that can be used by disabled people, it's just good business to do it. But I'm also putting these at the very beginning of the presentation because these are not the real compelling reasons to do the work that we do. The reason we do the work that we do is because we believe that everybody should have an equitable, fair, kind experience interacting with the things that we create. So just for a little bit of context and just to give you an idea about how I think about the work that I do. Historically, UX research is good at understanding the needs of people who can already use something. And this diagram that I'm displaying on the screen by Ida Treviranus is something that's really, powerfully shaped my own thinking about this work. This is a diagram that has 100 dots representing a sample of 100 people scattered around it. And most of the dots are in the center where they're very heavily concentrated, and that represents all the people for whom a design works. If you move out beyond that into a circle, a second circle, there's fewer dots, they're slightly less concentrated, and those are people for whom the design works, but with some difficulty. And go out one circle more, the fewest dots, the least densely concentrated. These are people who can't use a design. And most of the time, as researchers, we live in the center of this diagram because these are the people that we have the easiest access to, for whom it's easiest to understand and serve their needs. But by doing that, we end up missing the people who can't use a design. And very often, those people who can't use the thing are those billion people uh, um, uh, who globally who live with disabilities. And I put these things in conjunction simply to make the point that any of us who work in accessibility are often, or at least sometimes, we're told about how we can't spend too much time or resources on so-called edge cases, which one is not a great way to describe human beings, and two, if your edge case constitutes a billion people, you probably need to reconsider what you think of as an edge case. What is inclusive research? Inclusive research really is a lot of things. Like inclusive research is research that actively engages populations that historically have been excluded or underrepresented. And this is not limited to disability. There are all manner of identity, ways of identifying that can be included in the concept of inclusive research, and indeed intersectional identities as well are a core part of inclusive research. So I don't want to imply that that's not part of what we do in inclusive research, but like I said, my work focuses on people with disabilities. And we seek to challenge the assumptions that all people experience our products and services in the same way, and therefore we find ways to minimize exclusion. Now, at CVS Health, um, At CVS Health, and for if anyone is joining from outside the United States, if you're not familiar with CVS Health, it's a very large retail pharmacy, large online presence, and over 9,000 physical locations in the United States. We, in our inclusive research work, we conduct inclusive research to understand and better serve the needs of disabled people. And there's a lot of things that go into this work. Firstly, we recruit people with disabilities for our user research, and this is, obviously a foundational thing for doing research with people with disabilities. But it was a major undertaking to put in place the structures to make this happen. And I don't want to minimize all the work that we did to get that in place, although I'm not going to go into many details today. It was a precondition for all the other things that we want to do. And when we conduct research, we try to have impact with our insights by sharing our findings with our inclusive design colleagues and with the design organization more broadly. We partner with the UX research team to make inclusive practices more widespread. And uh, we are very focused on continually assessing and refining our research principles to be as ethical as possible, so that we are not reinscribing the what historically has been the exploitation or unfair treatment of disabled people in user research when they were included in user research at all. Um, so we have really three core principles that I want to draw attention to here, why we think this work is so important. One is that accessibility is more than compliance. And this morning, in a couple sessions so far at this conference, I've heard reference made to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are a set of guidelines that provide a standard for organizations to meet when creating online content to make sure that it meets a minimum threshold of accessibility. Compliance with these guidelines is really important. I don't want to suggest that it's not. But as a colleague of mine often likes to say, you can be completely compliant with WCAG and still fail people. So we are trying to understand the needs of people with disabilities so that we can be compliant and serve them in the way that they need to be served. Second, research without accessibility perpetuates exclusion. As I said before, traditionally UX research is good at learning about people that it already has easy access to. But what that means for accessibility is that products end up literally not being designed for people with disabilities because people with disabilities are not included in the process. And of course, we want to reverse that situation. And finally, accessibility-oriented research should be a standard practice. There are some particular skills and knowledge that are required to do accessibility-oriented user research, but it's really not a different genre from any other kind of UX research that you might encounter. And yet, for a variety of sort of ideological and practical reasons, it's considered a different sort of thing very commonly. And we're aiming to try and change that so that operating inclusively is the standard practice in our research. So that's a bit of a background about how and why we operate. But how do we scale this? How do we have influence? To think about that, we need to think about how we partner with our colleagues who work on our design system. And the challenge is that CVS is a very, very big company. We need to think about how we might not only develop our insights, but also ensure that those insights inform work across the enterprise. Because when we think about a company like CVS, and I imagine this is true for a lot of other large companies as well, inclusive research, our little inclusive research group consists of about 8 people, most of whom don't spend most of their time on inclusive research because we exist within an inclusive design team of about 45 or 50 people. And most of those individuals are embedded in design teams all over the company. So we don't have a lot of human capacity to work towards inclusive research. We are a small operation within a very large company. So our first point of contact is with our colleagues in inclusive design to answer questions that they have through research and to help them get insights that they need so that they can bring that to their work with their design teams and therefore start to spread some of the research insights to where it is needed. But inclusive design exists within a digital design organization that is I think about 500 people or so, maybe about 500 people. And this is where UX research and the design system team live. And by connecting with the design system team, that allows us to have some influence around the design organization. And also when we expand outwards one layer farther to the entire digital enterprise, which consists of about 5,000 people. So again, like a group of about 8 people trying to have widespread influence in our digital enterprise, we need partners in order to make that happen. And the design system team has been one of our greatest allies in our work. We've learned that there's a lot of advantages, mutual advantages to partnering with design system. We can inform the development of components and patterns with inclusive principles from the start. So there are accessibility designers embedded within the design system team. And when they have accessibility questions that they need answered with research, they come to us and we work together to get them those answers so that when they create these components, the insights we generate can spread very widely as teams all over the enterprise can pick up the components that have been created according to our guidance. We support each other with research and prototyping resources. If you've ever done research, user research with participants with disabilities, you know that prototypes are often a big barrier to making the research happen because a lot of assistive technologies that disabled people use, they just won't interact with flat design prototypes. You often need built prototypes in order to do this work. Well, no one on the inclusive research team has that skill set, but there are people on the design system team who do, and it's to our mutual benefit to work together so that we have prototypes and they get answers based on those prototypes. And it's a very good relationship that we have. And of course, when we work together, we can align on design priorities and approaches that can be dispersed around the enterprise more broadly. To date, we've done several projects together. We've investigated things like date of birth and other form inputs. We've done some work on card containers in terms of content and interactivity. We're working on tabs and focus order for screen readers. And we have the case that I'm going to tell you about now, which is about horizontal scrolls. And I'm just going to pause for a moment to take a drink of water. Great. So in this third and final and I frankly longest section of this presentation, I'm going to talk you through our process of creating a research study on the topic of horizontal scrolls and how the partnership with Design System played a role in that process. First, though, I want to establish some terminology here. I'm not intending to be normative about this terminology. There's a lot of terms that people use to talk about horizontal scrolls, and I just want you to understand the terms that I'm going to use as I go through this part of the presentation. So these components are often called carousels, sliders, slideshows, various other things. Some people use those terms interchangeably. Some people use them to mean different things. I'm not, like I said, not taking a position on that. It's just all of these different sorts of things that are part of this category of horizontal scrolls. And essentially, a horizontal scroll is a set of cards where not all of the cards are displayed at once. Many of the cards are concealed either to the left or to the right of the view or subset of cards on the screen at any given moment. And often you'll know that there are additional cards, there is additional content because you'll have partial cards on the left or the right or both. Often you'll also have navigation buttons on the left or the right or both. And there'll be a heading on the horizontal scroll. So that's just a very quick overview of what this thing is that we're investigating. Now, why are we investigating it? Well, we know that horizontal scroll components are challenging for a wide variety of assistive tech users. We knew this going in. We knew this was a problem because this, in digital design and digital accessibility, this is one of the most commonly pointed to patterns that pose challenges for people. We started thinking about how it impacts screen reader users in particular, but that very quickly widened out to users of any assistive technology because it really impacts everyone. But what we did not know was all of the finer points about what those accessibility obstacles are. And without that, we can't actually really create a pattern that works well for people with assistive technologies. But I should say at this point, just as a side note, we also think that the research, not just ours, but the research more broadly indicates that horizontal scroll components are usually not the right component to use for any given purpose. Even putting the accessibility challenges aside, they are hiding content for people. And we don't think that's necessarily a great practice. But we also recognize that these are pretty ubiquitous. They're not going away. And while we don't think that we can eliminate accessibility challenges with them, we do think we can minimize them quite a bit and make these a lot more accessible in the future. Now, when we interviewed assistive technology users about these, we always started out by asking them, just in general, what do you think about horizontal scrolls or carousels or whatever you call them? And we always got some version of this answer from Jordan, who was a screen reader user, who told us, when I think of a carousel or slider, I definitely think of them as an element that I'm going to have accessibility challenges with. And like I said, screen reader users who are typically blind or very low vision, who use a screen reader to interact with their computer and to know what content is on the screen at any given point, they have a lot of difficulty with horizontal scroll components because of how they can their functions aren't clear. They often will trap you in them. You can get in but not out, things like that. So Jordan is very wary of them. We also were told told this in even blunter fashion, like Frank, a magnification user, who told us, my gut reaction as soon as you say horizontal scrolling is, oh shit, it really can be confusing. So we ended up defining some high-level research questions, like what kind of context are appropriate for horizontal scrolls? How much information can there be within the whole component as well as on any particular card? Are assistive technology users able to perceive and get to all of the content that's not displayed at a given moment? And what are the specific challenges that AT users, assistive technology users, have with these components so that we can try to create a component that works well for everyone? We conducted 15 moderated sessions in this project, and that's a lot of sessions, but I'll explain why we felt we needed this many in a moment. We recruit for our projects through a partner called Fable, which is a company that a research company with a panel of assistive technology users. So we're able to recruit screen reader users, users of magnification, who will often zoom to as much as 800 or 1,000%, and often will also use some sort of color alteration to be able to perceive this content on the screen better. And a category that they call alternative navigation, which will include things like voice control of the computer and switch systems. So we did this in two phases because we wanted to first get a more general sense of what happens with horizontal scroll components in the wild. You know, they're all over the place. So how are people actually interacting with them when they encounter them? So we identified 3 retail sites, including our own, and we did some testing with participants with different assistive technologies so that we could understand, for instance, in the top image here, you can see that there are navigation buttons that overlap content. How does that work for people? In the bottom image, there are navigation buttons that are above instead of in line with the content. Can people easily operate that? We had questions about, different kinds of navigation, such as clicking and dragging. And we also wanted to know about focus behavior, which is particularly important for screen reader users. You know, if you go through a page, what is the order that items get focused on? We went ahead and we did all of that research. We presented out our findings to the design system team and to the design organization more broadly. And the design system team actually came back with some very specific questions that they wanted us to go deeper on so that when they create their component, they can be confident that they've accounted for all of the accessibility challenges and questions that they might have. So in this instance, we didn't use live sites. What we did instead was we had a partner on the design system team create built coded prototypes for us using CodePen. And those prototypes addressed all of the different sorts of features and questions that we still needed to understand. So this included things like how do we handle skip links, a link that appears only when a user tabs to it and allows them to move past the component without interacting with it. Should the cards be fully interactive? I'll come to this in a moment. This was one of the biggest and most contentious questions that we addressed in this research. We had things like, how do we handle headings and help text? And is it okay to omit the left and right navigation buttons? That seems a little counterintuitive, but from a colleague, we had a hypothesis that this may actually work. Turned out it didn't actually work, but there was a reasonable hypothesis and we got to test it and discard it based on user evidence. And finally, is it better to use a different progressive disclosure pattern altogether, like a button that says show all that will reveal more content without the user having to scroll? Now, I'm going to share a few insights from this research. I'm not nearly going to share all the insights from it because there were a lot of them. It's a very big deck that we ended up creating for this. And we did, in fact, share a lot of this at the CSUN Assistive Technology Conference a month and a half ago. But I do want to draw your attention to a few insights that I think demonstrate pretty well the value of doing user research with people with disabilities, who use assistive technologies, the sorts of things that we learn in those contexts, in those research contexts. So a first insight comes from screen reader users. Now, if you're not familiar with the screen reader, essentially, like I said before, what it is a software either native on a computer or added to a computer that has both the function of reading out content on the screen and providing interactivity that is specialized for, and even sometimes customized for the person using it. You know, typically a blind user, although not exclusively a blind user, who uses the screen reader to interact with the computer and know what is on the screen at any moment. The screen reader works in a way that is essentially linear, that whatever is in the code in the order it is in the code is what the screen reader perceives. That doesn't mean that the user of the screen reader has to go in order. There's all kinds of ways that they jump around on a page, but that is how the screen reader will encounter it. So the sort of the visual metaphor of a horizontal scroll doesn't really work with a screen reader. It doesn't work for a screen reader user. You know, where I visually can see that there's 3 cards on the screen and I can sort of get that if I swipe them one way, more cards will appear. That's not how they exist for a screen reader. The best way to, that they should exist for a screen reader is as an unordered list, something that is simple to move through, that is a known pattern that screen reader users encounter and know how to deal with. And like Adam said, in my head, it's a list of things, like an unordered list, but it's not coded as an unordered list. And our recommendation here was not necessarily that horizontal scrolls should be built as an unordered list, but rather that this was an effective way for designers and developers to have as a mental model for how the horizontal scroll should exist. It should be easy to move through as if it were a list. And if you're putting a lot of interactivity and structure around it that's not necessary for it, then you're missing the point of how a horizontal scroll should work. And you're going to end up making it a lot harder for people like Adam to use, who use a screen reader to navigate through it. A moment ago, I mentioned that the interactivity of the cards was highly contentious in this research. And by this, I mean, very simply, the question of should you be able to click on a card anywhere on it, or should you only be able to click on the piece of text that is, in fact, the link text? A lot of our colleagues were advocating strongly for clicking only on the link text. And we discovered in our research, actually, that that was the wrong approach. And there's a couple reasons why. One reason relates to magnification users. I told you at the beginning or earlier in this presentation that magnification users will often zoom to as much as 800 or 1,000% on their screen. So sometimes, for instance, you can imagine that they may not even be able to see the entire card at once. Like they may be able to see the top of the card, but not the bottom, or vice versa. So if they're looking at the top of a card and they can't see the link text, they may not even know that it is interactive. This is a very real scenario that we encountered. Another thing that we discovered, that we learned about magnification use in general, is that magnification users often have difficulty recognizing a series of repeating components. And that is exactly what a horizontal scroll is, a series of identically templated cards. It doesn't help sometimes when, like the image that's on display here, there's not a lot of contrast between the card and the background. So what magnification users rely on is changes in the mouse cursor to reinforce their perceptions of where things change on the screen. So if you're hovering over something that is interactive, again, like the image that's on the screen here, you will see the hand pointer version of the mouse cursor. Once you move off of that interactive thing, it will go back to the default arrow cursor. And when you move on to a new interactive thing, you get the hand pointer back. When the whole card is interactive, that actually gives magnification users a way to recognize the series of cards, because the cursor will be changing state as you move left to right. If only the link text is interactive, then they don't get that change of state and they can't perceive the pattern. We've made it a lot harder in that case. So um, uh, that was our case for why it should be fully interactive. And if you go the additional step and add some sort of hover state, like the red border in this image, that's best of all. As Shannon, a magnification user, said to us, "Ooh, I like that." As soon as that border popped up, I like when I go to the card, it turned red. It lets me know that's where I am. But magnification users aren't the only people who benefit uh, from having fully interactive cards. Anyone who uses a mouse benefits, and anyone who uses a device that simulates a mouse also benefits. So we did an interview with Dylan, who is a quad stick user. And a quad stick is a mouth operated device that is commonly used by quadriplegics and other people for one reason or another who don't have use of their hands to use a mouse. There's an image of it on the screen here, and it's really quite a complicated device. It can operate as a joystick operated by the mouth. There's a button on the bottom of it that can be operated with the lower lip. And the three holes in the blue part of this device are what are called sip and puff devices, that they do different things depending on whether you blow gently into it or suck gently on it. So it's a really incredibly versatile device. It's highly customizable. Dylan, like a lot of quad stick users, uses it for online gaming. But it's actually not very precise when you're using the joystick function to try and target a specific area on the page. Dylan highlighted this for us when he pointed out that, in relation to a version of the prototype where you had to click the text, where you couldn't click the card, he said, "I don't want to say it's tedious or annoying to do it like this, but it is, because you have to aim it with your head. I'm just saying it's really difficult on people with my accessibility device because the click area is so much smaller." And this applies to a lot of people as well. We saw something similar with people who might have hand tremors and have difficult with precision when they use a mouse, things like that. There's a lot of reasons why cards need to be fully interactive. And this is really a great thing, a great example in inclusive design as well, because we found this problem in relation to magnification users specifically. But the more we dig and the more we research and the more we understand, the clearer it becomes that this is a pattern that will benefit a very large number of users. In fact, it even benefits screen reader users who are not using a mouse, but definitely benefit when a horizontal scroll consists of a series of cards, each of which only has one point of focus. If the whole card can be focused, and then you move on to the next card and the next, that is that simplest version of how to create that list-like interpretation of a horizontal scroll. So what it all boils down to really is flexibility, position, and navigation. A horizontal scroll should be flexible in the means to operate it. And that's true of anything that we're talking about in inclusive design. Flexibility is really paramount here because that creates opportunities for a lot of different people with a lot of different access needs to be able to interact with whatever we're creating. You should be able to know where you are as you're using it, as we saw with with all of the participants I mentioned just now, and allow users to skip past it because we should not be forcing people into these things if they don't want to be. Again, we're trying to give users the most control possible over their experience. And by operating on these principles, we learned all of these things. We were able to inform our design system colleagues about the things that we learned. And we had things like that interactive card issue where we were able to persuade them through our research findings that fully interactive cards was the correct way to go about designing a horizontal scroll. It was not for everyone an expected result, but it was the clear result. And that means that these insights, when our design system team completes their work on horizontal scrolls, these insights will be baked into them and they'll start to make their way through the organization. It hasn't happened yet, it's work that is still in progress, but by doing this sort of research, we're able to have a very widespread impact in terms of how we design for people who use assistive technologies and for people in general. So that's all I have to say today. I'd be very happy to talk about any questions that you have about any aspect of this presentation, whether it's the research itself or the partnership or how we operate in our inclusive research work more generally. If you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can email me, gregory.weinstein@cvshealth.com. I'm always, always, always happy to talk about accessibility, UX research, things like that. So very happy to get in touch. And if there are any questions now, I'm happy to discuss them.
Excellent, Greg. Yes, I've curated a few questions for you here. You sort of halfway answered this. Nicholas, as I mentioned, that you talked early on about deliberately recruiting people with disabilities, and that you used a thing called Fable for that. Could you elaborate a bit on Fable and how that works?
Yes, Fable is it's a research platform that has a panel that comprised entirely of people who use assistive technologies, things like screen readers and system magnification and switch systems like the quad stick I just talked a bit about, all those sorts of things. So we partner with them. We've got an ongoing contract with them to recruit and run research through their platform. It simplifies the process a lot, and it's not a workable solution for everyone in every context because it's not really, they don't really do one-off work for, for companies who, or for people who are interested in doing a single project. I believe they do not do one-off work like that. There are other ways of going about that. There are other companies, consultancies that you can partner with if you're interested in doing this sort of work once or a couple of times. You can partner with community organizations that serve people with different disabilities. That's a very common way to try and recruit. There are many ways that you can go about the recruiting. Working with Fable is just the core way that we've been doing it at CVS.
That's interesting. I was unaware of that at all. Jana asked if your accessibility testing was remote or in person, and whether you really focused on people with visual disabilities, or was this a broad spectrum across people with a variety of disabilities?
The research was remote. We primarily at this point do remote research. It sort of moved this way in the pandemic like it did for everyone, and we haven't really gone back yet, although we're starting to push in that direction. But everything we do through Fable is in fact online. And it was not just people with vision problems, vision challenges. Although those are two of the categories we worked with, we try to tailor our recruiting to the needs of a particular project. And in this case, we knew that the components we were talking about were going to be challenging for people with assistive technologies across the board. So yes, we did include screen reader users who are primarily blind and magnification users who have a pretty wide range of visual disabilities. But we also included people who use voice to control their computer, and we use people switch systems to control their computer to try and get at as many different use cases really as we're able. And honestly, like for this, it was really important because it gave us a broad set of insights. It allowed us to confirm certain findings, but it also pointed out that sometimes what one assistive technology user needs will conflict with what another assistive technology user needs. And that sometimes can be quite hard to challenge. That's also why we think that we can minimize accessibility challenges with these things, but we can't eliminate them because there are things that will not work for all assistive technology users.
Right. And Trey asks, did CVS design system approaches previously implement much user testing, or were they really focused on best practices? How did that change over? And did that affect their willingness to bring inclusive design on board? That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, our teams have been developing sort of in parallel, not always, in collaboration, but in parallel. And as they've gotten more mature, they've recognized the value of getting input from us sometimes. And as we've gotten more mature, we have also recognized that partnering with them has great impact for our work and for accessibility in general in the company. So it wasn't really that there was a before we were doing this. We sort of were growing at the same time in the work that we were doing, and it's turned into a very fruitful partnership because of that.
Well, actually, and I'm going to toss in something here that you might want to talk about for a moment. When I was with Google for several years, I had a brief exposure to accessibility on one team that I was on, and we observed that there was a misconception that inclusive design only benefits people with disabilities. And we discovered that inclusive design makes it work better for everyone, not just the people that we were targeting for that. And so we found that inclusive design is just better design 99% of the time. Is that your experience? And would you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%. That is, the core of what not just us in research, but like the whole inclusive design team at CVS Health is promoting that we are not just designing for people with disabilities. We are designing to create, very inclusive, equitable experiences that anyone can engage with. It's just that people with disabilities very often are the people who get left out. So we need to focus on them a lot.
When they can more easily access your site, then everyone can more easily access the site. So everybody benefits. Very good.
Yep.
Another question or two here. We still have a couple of minutes. Let's see. Oscar says he wonders if he's correct in thinking that most interactive components like flip cards and tab selection and so on began as exclusive. And how can teams better optimize interactive components to be accessible from square one rather than having to go back and retrofit, is the way I read that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, the answer
can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
The answer really is to include people who can advise on the inclusiveness from the start. Sometimes, and there's a lot of ways to do that. This is getting a bit beyond like my purview as a researcher in a sense, but like a lot of, there are sometimes designers, and there are designers that we've already heard from at this conference speak about how they integrate inclusive principles, accessibility principles into their design work. There's places that operate on the model that CVS operates on, where we have our accessibility designers embedded all over the company to advise on design work and accessibility as it's being created, so that you don't have to go back and do that retrofitting, as you say, because that, it's frustrating, it's time consuming, and frankly, it's very costly when you have to go back and refit something to make it more accessible. When you do it from the beginning, it becomes a lot easier. It's hard to get that going, and that's that often is the challenge that we hear people talking about. How do you start? But there's real value in starting doing it from the jump.
And a follow-up question from Trey, actually kind of what you were just talking about. Are there aspects of research that seem to be the most resistant to effective implementation of accessibility testing? Where are your hurdles and your stumbling blocks in that?
I see we're just about at our time, but real quick, I don't think that there's any particular aspect of UX research that is resistant. I think in my experience, it's very comes down to like sort of like company cultures and things like where people don't think that it's important, or they don't think they have the knowledge to do it, or they don't think they have the time to do it. Like there's just the barriers, the places where we see resistance are places that are just sort of like trying to operate too leanly or too quickly, and therefore are excluding people in the process. which, means that you can operate fast, but it also means that you are excluding people. And ultimately, that's a losing proposition.
There you go. Okay, well, I want to thank Greg for a really, really interesting presentation, and thanks to everyone. We had between 25 and 30 people at various times. So thanks to everybody for your good questions, and Greg for your great answers. I appreciate that. There are more sessions and presentations starting in 15 minutes, half past the hour. So I will say again, thank you, and we'll see you all in the next session. And that's the end of this one. So thank you, Greg. See you next time.
Thank you all.